I want you to turn to the person next to you. I want you to look them in the eye, and I want you to introduce yourself as a genius. Let's begin. Now, we have three brains that allow us to go from thinking to doing to being. Each brain is its own individual biocomputer with its own anatomy and circuitry, its own chemistry and physiology, its own history, as well as its own sense of time and space. The first brain is called the neocortex. That's that corrugated walnut on the outside with all of its folds and valleys. It's the newest piece of neurological machinery. It's the most specialized and advanced in human beings and dolphins. You're listening to me right now with your neocortex. It's the seat of your thinking brain. Right underneath your neocortex is another brain called the limbic brain, or the emotional brain, or the chemical brain, or the mammalian brain. And right behind that is what's called the cerebellum. It's part of the reptilian brain. It's the oldest brain in evolution, and it's the seat of your subconscious mind. Now, your brain is made up of 100 billion neurons. If you took 100 billion sheets of paper and stacked them on top of each other, it would be 5,000 miles high. That's the distance from Los Angeles to London. And in the thinking brain, you have about 10,000 to 40,000 connections per neuron in your thinking brain. But they're not really two-dimensional like that. They're more three-dimensional. And if you took a piece of gray matter the size of a grain of sand, you would have 100,000 neurons in them with over 1 billion connections. Now, nerve cells in the neocortex love to learn. And the function of the neocortex is to learn new information. And so every time you learn something new, you make a new connection in your thinking brain. So you come to the LOHAS event and you learn about sustainability, or you learn about leadership or emotional connection, and every time you learn something new, your brain physically changes and you upscale your hardware to reflect what you've learned. And every single bit of information that your neocortex, your thinking brain, is conscious of, whether it's theory, philosophy, intellectual data, facts, there's a physical change that takes place in your brain. So, as your brain begins to pay attention to new information and there's physical changes, the research shows that you can make up to 2,600 connections in your thinking brain when you're exposed to new information. That was research done by Kandel in the year 2000. But what he found out is that if you learn that information and you don't revisit it, the neurons begin to break apart. So if learning is making synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. And it takes a little bit of repetition for nerve cells to begin to develop a long-term relationship. So as you begin to pay attention and repeat what you're learning, your neurons begin to fire and wire together. And the more they communicate, the more they develop a long-term relationship. And just like any relationship, the more you communicate, the more bonded you become. So as you learn vital information, then your brain begins to assemble those networks of information into what's called neural networks. And neural networks are just gangs of neurons that have fired and wired together to form a community of neurosynaptic connections. And it could be related to a thought, an idea, a memory, a skill, or a behavior. And neuroscientists affectionately call these neural networks because they're clusters that are related to something that you can do or think. You want to see a thought? There you go. That's a thought right there. And your brain generates more electrical impulses in one day than all of the cell phones on the planet put together. So as your neurons begin to fire into networks, those networks are physical representations of something that you've learned in your external environment. So you're sitting here this weekend and you're learning important information about leadership or sustainability or innovation. And as you learn this information, it is stored in your philosophical, theoretical, intellectual, analytical neocortex. Now, when you take that information and you apply it, and you personalize it or demonstrate it, it means you're going to have to modify your behavior in some way and do something differently. The moment you change your actions and you do something differently, you're going to have a new experience. Now, when you're in the midst of an experience, all of your 5 senses plug you into the external environment. And as your brain is picking up all this vital sensory data, all that information is rushing back to your brain, and it's causing jungles of neurons to begin to organize themselves into patterns. The moment those neurons string into place, they reinforce the circuits that you learned intellectually, and your brain then makes a chemical. And that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. So the moment you experience something new, your body begins to get to a new emotional signature, and that emotion then begins to teach your body what your mind has intellectually understood. So then you can remember the birth of one of your children, you can remember graduating from college, you can remember a promotion, you can remember catching a fish off the coast of Mexico, you can remember where you were on 9/11. As a matter of fact, you could tell me where you were, what time of day it was, and what you were doing. And we could say that everything that you were seeing and hearing changed your internal chemical state. And the moment you felt differently inside of you, you woke up and paid attention to what caused it outside of you. And that event, in and of itself, is called a memory. So if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you're living by the same emotions every single day, then it means nothing new is happening in your life. And if those emotions then are driving the way you think, then for the most part, most people are thinking in the past. So then if you think a certain thought that makes you feel a certain way, and the moment you feel that way, you think more of the same thoughts, that cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking creates what I call a state of being. And a state of being is when your mind and body are working together. So now, you've come to the event, you've learned all of this vital information, it's stored in your thinking, analytical, philosophical neocortex. You go and buy the books, and you read the books about leadership and creativity and sustainability. And then you get the CDs and you listen to them on the car, and you're learning about empathy and compassion, connection and vulnerability. And you get to work now, and you're walking around in your office saying, you know what your problem is? You need to be more compassionate. Yeah, that's your problem. And you over there, you need to forgive. That's why you're the way you are. Everybody is amazed at the knowledge that's coming from your mouth. They're knocking on your door at work, asking for you to administer to them, to solve their problems in life. And everything's going really well. And you're getting ready for the company Christmas party. And now as you're getting ready for the company Christmas party, your best friend calls you up and they tell you that the person that threw you under the bus, you know, the one that betrayed you and took your ideas and got a promotion, she's at the Christmas party. And you pull over on the side of the road and you begin to think about how you're going to poison her wine. How when she goes into the bathroom, you're going to get her in a headlock in one of the stalls. And you start running through a list of behaviors because you've had some stressful experiences with that person in your past. Now, stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your body's knocked out of balance. Now, whether you're seeing a coworker or you're seeing a lion, your body responds in the exact same way. The neocortex interprets a threat from your external environment. It sends a signal to the limbic brain. All of a sudden, you get an electrochemical signal down to the adrenal glands, and you turn on that fight or flight nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system, and your body's now knocked out of balance, and your body is in emergency mode. And the moment you're in emergency mode, there are physiological changes that take place. Your pupils dilate, your salivary juices shut off. It's not a time to eat a steak when you're being chased by a lion. Your respiratory rate increases, your heart rate increases, and blood is sent to your extremities. Now think about this. What was once very adaptive, being chased by a lion, and now you're confronting your coworker, your body is responding as if it's being chased by a lion, and now it's becoming maladaptive. And whether it's justified or not, the moment you turn on that sympathetic nervous system and your body is knocked out of balance, if you keep turning on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now the body's living in emergency mode and it begins to break down. So now, when you react to something or someone in your life, there's a refractory period of chemicals that are created that you get to control. And if you don't know how to control your emotional reaction to someone or something, and you allow that refractory period to last for hours or days, that's called a mood. So you say to someone, "What's wrong with you?" "Oh, I'm in a mood." "Really? Why are you in a mood?" "Well, this thing happened to me 5 days ago, and I'm living by the same emotional reaction. I'm memorizing my emotions." And if you keep that same refractory period from an event in your past lasting for weeks or months, that's called a temperament. Why does he have such an angry temperament? I don't know. Why are you so angry? Well, this thing happened to me 6 months ago, and I'm living by the same emotional reaction. And according to the biological model, that person is anchored to the past. And if you keep the same emotional reaction going on for years on end, that's called a personality trait. And most people's personalities are the emotions that they've memorized that keep them connected to the past, and we could never create a new future holding on to the emotions of the past. So then emotional intelligence is shortening the refractory period to your emotional reactions. And when you react to something in your life, and those chemicals are running, and that primitive nervous system's turned on, there will always be a gap between the way things appear and the way things really are. And if you act during that altered state, you will always say the same thing. "I should have never said that. I should have never done that. I should have never thought that. I should have never sent that email." Because those emotions cause us to act like an amped up animal with a big memory bank, and those chemicals activate circuits in the brain that are equal to your predictable habitual self. And so then people act in very primitive ways. Now, you don't even have to see a lion or your coworker. You can begin to auto-suggest in your brain. You could begin to think about problems in your life, and you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. And because the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else, the moment we attend to that thought based on some future event or some past event, we turn on the fight or flight nervous system just by thought alone. And those chemicals that are connected to that sympathetic nervous system are highly addictive. And people become addicts to stress, and they live in emergency mode, and they look for conditions in their life to reaffirm that addiction so that they can get a rush of energy to remember who they think they are. And people who function in high emotional states for an extended period of time ultimately will become less productive, they will become selfish, they will no longer communicate, and they, for the most part, will begin to break down an organization. So now you're sitting on the side of the road, and you all of a sudden said, "Oh my God, I read the book on compassion and forgiveness, and I went to that LOHAS workshop. Damn, now I got to pay attention to what I'm thinking about." And we have this faculty in our resources as a human being because the size of our frontal lobe, we can think about what we're thinking about. We can notice how we're behaving, and we can pay attention to how we're feeling. And that concept of mindfulness or metacognition means you can observe the circuits in your brain thinking, but you don't have to participate in them. And that function then allows you to begin to observe those automatic programs, but no longer be them. And nerve cells that no longer fire together, no longer wire together, and as you observe those thoughts, you're settling down the circuits in your brain that are connected to the old self. By the same means, as you're sitting on the side of the road, you said, "Oh, I read the book. That's right. Let's see. What did the book say? And as you begin to recall the information that you've learned that's now wired in your thinking brain philosophically, now you're beginning to activate those networks of neurons, and the frontal lobe, like a great symphony leader, begins to select all the knowledge that's stored in your brain. And it says, oh, God, I should see myself in her. Yuck. Okay, I'll give it a shot. Let go of my past. And as it begins to select these different networks of neurons, you naturally begin to plan your behaviors. You begin to think about what you're going to do in the dinner. And as you mentally rehearse who you're going to be, the moment you begin to cause these neurons to fire in a specific sequence, pattern, and combination, you produce a level of mind, because nerve cells that fire together wire together, that is a reflection of your conscious intention. And now you have an image to follow. And as you remind yourself of who you no longer want to be, and you remind yourself of who you do want to be, you begin to install the neurological circuits in your brain. You begin to prime your brain and install actual hardware and put it in place so that you have circuits to use when you get in the dinner. Now, there is a kind of biological shuffle that goes on between the old self and the new self. You're trying to fire this new thought called, I am compassionate, I am connected, I have empathy, I forgive. And as you're trying to fire this new thought, there's only one problem. You know what that is? You fired and wired all these other thoughts that are happening behind the scenes of your awareness, saying, I don't like her any longer, I'm going to turn her into the boss. You're going to start running through these old circuits. But if you persist with the same thought over and over again, and you keep your attention on that thought, sooner or later that will become the loudest thought in your head. And the moment it becomes the loudest thought in your head, that's the strongest signal to this neuron. So now, as the brain begins to seal this new circuit called compassion, the action potential, the thought is traveling this way, but there's a glue that seals the circuit that's traveling in this direction, from the postsynaptic terminal to the presynaptic terminal. But there's only a certain amount of glue to go around to seal this circuit. So what it starts to do is it starts to take the glue from the other thoughts and behaviors in your brain. So there goes the memory of choking her. There goes the memory of poisoning her from disease. There goes the thought that you're too much like your mother. There goes the experience in the past. And the brain literally prunes away those connections. And that is what we call the biology of change. And we have seen this thousands of times when people begin to make the journey across the river of change. Now, this is what it looks like in real time. Unhooking from the old self, reconnecting to the new self, and it could happen in a matter of moments. So now, you pull back on the road, and you're reminding yourself of who you no longer want to be, and you're reminding yourself of who you do want to be. You're silencing the circuits that are connected to the old self, and you're priming and activating and firing and wiring the new circuits, and you're reviewing what you're going to do, and you're rehearsing mentally in your mind and combining all that knowledge with your experience of yourself, and you walk into the dinner. And you do exactly what the books say. You get your behaviors to match your intentions. You get your actions equal to your thoughts. You get your mind and body working together. And the moment you do that, you have a new experience. In the presence of your enemy, all of a sudden, you start to feel compassion. You start to feel empathy. And the moment you begin to feel that emotion, you activate that limbic brain, and now you are teaching your body emotionally to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So we could say knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, you are embodying knowledge. The word is becoming flesh, and you are signaling new genes in new ways because it's a new experience from your environment. And you could say that you are chemically instructing your body to understand what your mind intellectually understood. Now you have two brains working together. You have your mind and body working together. Your heart is open. You feel compassionate. But it's not enough to do it once. You can't forgive your coworker one time and expect to be on the stained glass windows in church. It doesn't work. You have to be able to repeat the experience. You have to be able to do it over and over again. You have to be able to do it so many times that you chemically, through experience, condition your body to understand compassion as well as your conscious mind. And if you keep doing it over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, you'll activate that third brain called your cerebellum, the seat of your subconscious. It's the home of your habits and your skills. We could say that you've done it so many times that you no longer have to consciously think about it, because you've conditioned your body to become the mind of compassion, or the mind and body are now working as one. And we could say now that you've gone from embodying that knowledge to now it's being innate in you. It's who you are, it's automatic, it's second nature, it's easy, it's familiar. As a matter of fact, you know how, but you don't even know how you know how, because the body has been trained to become the mind. And when we are in this state of being, we have memorized an internal neurochemical order that no person, no thing, no experience can move us from it. And to go from thinking to doing to being then, and following these three brains, gives us permission to demonstrate all the changes we want to see in cultures and organizations around the world. You cannot in any way stand up for peace and then drive down the freeway and flip somebody off or judge your coworker. That's mind doing one thing and body doing something else. If you want peace in a company and organization, that you have to demonstrate it yourself. And that what we've found in our research around the world is that when you begin to transform individuals, person by person, you begin to transform a culture. And that as we begin to understand the model of change requires moving from the old self to the new self. And when you begin to step outside of your familiar self and begin to embark on personal change, the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And when you no longer make those same choices, now you've just stepped in the river of change. And for most people, it feels uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. It feels different. It's unpredictable. And the moment a person feels uncomfortable because they don't feel like themselves, they make the same choice that leads to the same behavior, that creates the same experience, that produces the same emotion, which then causes them to return back to the same self. Stepping into the river of change and going from the old self to the new self, crossing that river is the biological, neurological, chemical, genetic death of the old self. It is a literal dying of the old biology. And some people will say that's the unknown and I can't predict the unknown, I can't predict my future. Well, the best way to predict your future in the unknown is to create it. And to begin to think about who you do want to be in your life and how you want to demonstrate that in different cultures and communities and organizations. So Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an action, but a habit. Now, for the most part, you think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of the 60 to 70,000 thoughts that you think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So the same thoughts will always lead to the same choices. The same choices will always lead to the same behaviors and actions. The same behaviors will lead to the same experiences, and the same experiences will produce the same feelings and emotions, and the same emotions will inspire the same thoughts, and that's called a personality. That's called an identity. And your biology is equal to how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So then when people begin to realize that the brain begins to hardwire its circuitry, because nerve cells that fire together wire together, as you think the same thoughts and perform the same actions, your brain begins to hardwire itself into a finite set of patterns. And that finite set of patterns, that box in the brain, that finite signature is called a personality. And by the time we're 35 years old, we become a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, beliefs, and perceptions that function just like an automatic program. And so when it becomes time to change, and the person's going to use 5% of their conscious mind to go against 95% of what they've memorized subconsciously, they can think positively all they want. But if they've memorized negativity, that's mind and body in opposition. A person can pray and create a dream board for a new life and have their vision very clear, but if they feel unworthy or if they feel guilty, that's mind and body in opposition. And we have to then recondition the body to a new mind. So all of this knowledge that you are embarking on and understanding and embracing this week, these innovative and creative ideas, begins to fire new thoughts in your brain. And those new thoughts should then lead to new choices. And the moment you make a new choice, you're going to have a new behavior that's demonstrated. That new behavior means you get your body involved. And getting people to go from thinking to doing is like herding cats. But if you can make your way to that state of action, then if you can get your behaviors to match your conscious intentions, you will have a new experience. And that new experience then begins to produce a new emotion. And that new emotion then inspires new thoughts. And that's called evolution. And your biology, your neurocircuitry, your genetic expression literally changes to reflect a new personality and a new state of being. And we know this because we've observed transformation now for the last 10 years, and our simple message is your personality creates your personal reality. That is it. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's sitting here today has created their present personal reality called their life. So then wouldn't you agree then that if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, then you'd have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about? Start noticing how you've been behaving and what habits you've been demonstrating, and becoming aware of those emotions that we memorize, that we think is who we are, but those are just feedback mechanisms from the past. So then when you begin to decide what thoughts you do want to fire and wire in your brain, what behaviors you do want to demonstrate, and what emotions you do want to feel, and give your body a taste of what that future would be like emotionally, now you're teaching your body emotionally to understand it ahead of the actual experience. And every great person in history understood this. They never allowed their environment to control how they thought and felt. Every great person in history believed in a future that they couldn't see or experience with their senses yet, but they've thought about enough times in their mind that their brain was physically changed to look like the experience has happened. And the new science of neuroplasticity says you can change your brain just by thinking differently. And then can you emotionally embrace what that future reality is going to be like, to the extent that you condition your body into believing the future has already happened, signaling new genes in new ways, so that your body begins to change, so that it looks like the event has happened. Whether it was Martin Luther King or William Wallace or Mahatma Gandhi, Joan of Arc, they all had a dream that was bigger than them. And if we allow our environment to control how we think and feel, then we are victims to our culture. To think greater than your environment means then you have a vision that's bigger than you. And when you have the audacity, the courage, and the strength to step out into the unknown and begin to live as if that future experience has already happened to you, that's called leadership. And this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And as all the different paradigms break down, the medical model, the political model, the environment, the economic model, the religious model, they're collapsing because something new has to be demonstrated. And it's up to you and I then to lead by example. Thanks for listening.